In the past, there were enough hacks that were happening, but most of them were very focused on enterprises. And so individuals didn't feel the personal impact. But when you had ransomware attacks like the Colonial Pipeline ransomware, where a portion of the eastern seaboard that doesn't have access to gas stations, that has a pretty dramatic effect. That's when you start to see some of the folks in the cyber community ending up on CNN to talk about, hey, what is cybersecurity and why does it matter to you?
If you have a CEO talking about security incidents and why it's important to be vigilant, why it's important to follow the best practices on the company all hands, and if it happens on, let's just say, monthly basis, if there is some kind of time allocated to it, like, you will see shift. You will also see shift when you see that the executive leadership is not trying to work around the very same controls that are being imposed on other people. Basically, if the CEO is asking the security team to turn off MFA because it's too hard for them to log in, trust me, it will propagate. Like, it will propagate and it will spread.
Well, guys, welcome to Be Fearless podcast. This is actually a very unusual episode, considering that both of you are hosts of your own podcast, and which I listen all the time, to be fair. So whenever I'm in Singapore, my lunch breaks is listening to your podcast.
Thank you.
Just to give background, Sid is a partner at Foundation Capital and has navigated everything from Wall Street to private equity to cybersecurity investing. And you found your niche, and you also curate Foundation IT and Security Dinner series, and bring together top security leaders from emerging startups. And we have Ross. Ross was the head of product at Lima Charlie and the author of widely read Venture in Security newsletter. We have quite a few people in the team that actually also.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I generally don't recommend people read it.
Yeah.
It's all been built by ChatGPT. Right?
No. Sadly, no. Like, sadly, it does require.
You can really see actually when it's like built by ChatGPT.
Mahendra, who is not here, his books are written by ChatGPT.
Too bad he's not here. And you also recently published your book, Cybersecurity for Builders, and you're working on a stealth startup.
That is correct, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, super happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.
Yeah, so maybe we can kick things off by a quick introduction of yourself. I know I introduced you, but maybe you want to include something else that listeners don't know about you. Say it.
I think maybe the only thing I'd add is just, I invest in the startups at the earliest stages. So typically formation stage, and 80% of the time it's seed investing, and about 20% of the time it's Series A investing. And I lead all of those rounds. I take board seats in each of those companies, and we try to build them over a long period of time. And as you already referenced, I really focus on security and IT. Those are the two areas. But as a firm at Foundation Capital, we do a whole bunch of other stuff. We do broadly enterprise software investing, we do fintech investing, and we do crypto investing.
Interesting. Ross?
Yeah, so in my case, I'm an operator. I have been in product management for well over a decade, moved across different industries, ended up in cybersecurity, fell in love with the space, and became like an accidental influencer or something along those lines.
You said it. I love it. Now we can all say it.
I had to say it because you were grilling me about this right before before we started the recording. But no, so in my case, I have always been doing the actual work and blog and everything else is just a side project that I spend my weekends on because I don't have life and I enjoy doing this kind of things.
That's exciting. How did you guys meet in the first place?
I don't remember. So I think it was organic. I think I started writing a blog and then eventually probably Sid reached out. Because
I actually do know this. Ross reached out to me on LinkedIn.
I reached out. Yes. Okay, then.
Who made the first step?
Who made the first step?
That I remember.
Yes. But you see, at the very least, you responded.
I did respond.
My first interaction with Mahendra was sending him an email that he did not respond to up until today. It's been about 3 years and I'm still waiting for that response.
How do you guys host podcasts?
Oh, no. Mahendra is amazing. It's just he is very good at prioritizing. And, having random people reach out to him with no purpose is a bad prioritization.
Fair enough.
And I'm only grilling Mahendra because he is not here today and he is not able to, to
Respond.
speak and respond.
Yeah,
Yes.
he'll be listening.
He will be.
And, in the future.
Fun.
Yes.
So maybe let's dive into what you do as an investor or someone who influences the market. Sid, question to you. So you've been in the space for quite some time now. How do you see this space, cybersecurity space, evolving in the next 3 to 5 years? What changed? What do you see to be changing?
I think certainly the last 5 years has been all about a massive expansion of the cyber market. And there's been kind of two big areas of that expansion. One, it's been the number of folks in the software industry who recognize cybersecurity as a real category, which wasn't the case 5 years ago. And the second piece is just the average person recognizing that cyber and risk from, of your digital assets by hackers is something that they should be worried about. And, I think we have to credit the hackers for making that recognition possible. I think in the past, there were enough hacks that were happening, but most of them were very focused on enterprises. And so individuals didn't feel the personal impact. But when you had ransomware attacks like the Colonial Pipeline ransomware, where there's a portion of the eastern seaboard that doesn't have access to gas stations, that has a pretty, dramatic effect. That's when you start to see some of the folks in the cyber community ending up on CNN to talk about, hey, what is cybersecurity and why does it matter to you? And then obviously last summer we had a pretty major event happen with CrowdStrike and their kind of big oopsie. Yeah. And the big oopsie indicated to everyone else that, wow, there's this quote unquote little cybersecurity company, not that little, that no one's ever heard of, that can, with the push of a button, completely disrupt normal everyday life because of how, used it is within existing software systems. So I think that's been the big change over the past 5 years. And I think, when I look at the next 5 years, really, it's just where do we see innovation happen, both in terms of threat actors and what they do, but also in terms of, the new founders who have entered this market, who weren't in this market. Ross, I'd put you in that bucket. You entered cyber and you described this. You didn't kind of focus on cyber from the get-go. And I think that's a huge example of kind of new opportunity for innovation.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if having entered security actually within that timeline that you've just described, 5 years. I don't know if I fully agree with Sid's perspective on the state of security.
Of course not.
And I think partly that is because, yes, most definitely over the past 5 years, the importance of security has grown. But I do believe that for an average person, I don't think much has changed in terms of their perception of security. You can talk to an average software developer and you will ask them, okay, at your work, what are some examples of security controls that you have to that you're facing or dealing with? And everybody will say, yeah, we use password managers, we rely on all kinds of gateways and so on and so forth. But then if you ask the same person, okay, and for your personal, finances, account management, what are you doing? And many people will say, oh, I'm not doing anything. I just don't have the time. So yes, security has been increasingly something that everybody is talking about, especially in business 100%. But on the consumer side, I don't know if there is as much awareness as what you're seeing. When it comes to business and B2B, of course, enterprises do recognize the importance of it, and no security leader, no CEO wants to be on the news explaining how they let a breach happen. But when it comes to an average, student, marketer, product manager, or anybody else just living their lives, I don't think, sadly, security has become as important as it should have been, given what's actually happening in the real world.
I think what starts to happen is there is this blend between personal life and work life just starts to go further and further, where you practically don't exactly see this separation. And even personally for myself, when I open Gmail, I have my personal Gmail open, I have my work Gmail open. At the end of the day, for attackers, is like, if you have gateway to personal life, then you have gateway to work life. I'm curious, what do you think when it comes to investment? Is this something that companies like to address, or how does the whole investment market look into this?
In cyber broadly?
Yeah.
I think and you're talking about investment from a customer perspective or venture capital? So those are both different.
I would say venture capital.
I think the venture world thinks of cyber very positively today. I mean, there's more than enough capital flowing into cyber.
And there will be even more after Viz.
That's a great point. I think Ross is right. I mean, every time you have a major return happen like Wiz, that's a further indicator to those who haven't ever entered this market that, wow, you can actually create a lot of value in this market. So I don't think that will drop anytime soon. There's somewhere around 6,000 startups in cyber. It's more than large enough to give new opportunities for innovation. Is it too large? I think that's always the big debate that folks have. And I think, Ross, you've written an article on this topic, I remember. But I personally don't think that I think that there's lots of new opportunity for innovation in cyber. And sometimes maybe we have, kind of too much investment going into one subcategory in cyber. But I don't think overall cyber as a category is being overinvested.
I like that you touched upon Wiz, and I think everyone is trying to interpret the whole acquisition in their own way. And I wonder, what's your interpretation? What does it mean overall for investment market and cyber, or the way the whole field is developing? What to expect in the future, and what does it mean?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it means there's going to be a lot more excitement on the founder side. There is going to be a lot more excitement on the investor side. To me, the other aspect of it that hasn't yet been discussed very actively is the fact that several years from now, when everybody shares vest and when all the Viz early employees are free to embark on their new journeys, the number of cybersecurity startups that will be starting up at that time is probably going to be absolutely insane. Because just think about the first 100, 200, 300 people who have been at Viz from day one, who have seen what it takes to scale the company, who have seen what it takes to build the product that customers love and recommend to their peers and so on and so forth. And then investors who are going to be chasing a lot of those people and saying hey, you were an employee number 65 at Viz, it's time for you to build something. So we will definitely see a wave of innovation several years from now. But as far as today is concerned, I mean, I think the short-term consequences is definitely more excitement from the VC side, more excitement from the founder side to embark on the journey building security companies, and certainly a lot more room for existing players in the cloud security space to see what they can do and how they can take advantage of this opportunity in the market. And on the customer's end, I don't think much changes. Customers were relying on one product. Now some people will start reevaluating and trying to understand where to go from here and what does this acquisition mean for their security portfolio. The reality is that there are companies in the industry, in the tech industry, known for killing the acquisitions they make. I don't know if Google is one of them. I don't think there has been enough history with Google making those big security acquisitions for people to form a strong opinion. So I'm sure most customers will stay with Viz for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I think, as you mentioned, right now, every employee that was with Viz, number 65, 67, whatever, they're all thinking, should I start my own company? And I think it might bring a lot of noise to the industry. How do you really filter through this noise and really see, okay, what is good, what is not good? Because I feel I just arrived to the area. It seems very crowded. How do you go through all this noise?
I can start and I can say that, look, as Sid said, there is about 6,000 security startups. And whether or not that's a lot, I think it depends on your context. To me, it's similar, when you talk to people, for example, who complain that San Francisco has become incredibly expensive. And I think that there are two ways of looking at it. One is if you grew up locally and if you're used to certain neighborhoods, then you're looking at the city and you're saying, oh, this is more expensive than what I remember it being 20 years ago. From that perspective, it's definitely more expensive. But if you look at the market as a whole, and if you compare the cost of living in San Francisco to the cost of living in other global cities, the cost of living in Singapore, cost of living in London, cost of living in, Berlin, New York, you suddenly realize that, yes, it is expensive, but that is not because the city itself is expensive. It's because the life in global centers, global, metropolises is expensive. I look at security from the very similar angle. If you still remember the times 20 years ago when there were only antivirus and firewall companies in the market and like sprinkles of some other categories, then yeah, this is most certainly a crowded space. But if you look at it objectively and you say, for example, in fintech, which is the industry that I came from, I remember about 5 years ago, there were over 50,000 companies. If you look at HR tools, if you look at MarTech, marketing tools, there's like 60, 70, 80, 100,000 tools. So is security a crowded space? Well, that depends. If you're looking at it from the historical perspective, then obviously now we have the most vendors we've ever had. But if you're looking at it from more of the technological space and the realization that the fact that there are so many tools, it also means that more enterprises have realized that security is a priority, and there is more competitive pressure for companies to innovate and offer something new. And having, 5 or 10 companies tackling the same problem is actually a good thing, because from the long-term perspective, that means it's going to lead to better prices for customers, better quality products, better security coverage. It doesn't always mean that way, but it often drives the innovation in that direction. So how do you make sense of it? Frankly, I think most security leaders have developed a great level of immunity when it comes to navigating the complexity in the security space. I personally don't. I have met a number of CISOs that would say, "Oh my God, there is so much happening on the on the RSA floor or on Black Hat floor," but I haven't met anybody who would be confused. Like they are, because the majority of the people, they start with the problems their organization is experiencing, and they're looking out to see what can solve those problems. You don't really see CISOs running around screaming, "Oh my God, I don't know what to do with those vendors," because that's not how they make decisions. So yes, the market has become, bigger than it was before, to a large degree because there is more investment, both from the VC side, but also there is more investment from the enterprise side and from the end user side. And I think that's a good thing.
Definitely.
I think the only thing to add just more broadly would be whether there are more opportunities or not. For us as venture capitalists, most VCs are looking at a few different factors to try to determine whether to invest, right? And I think of it as 5 big kind of areas. There's team, there's market, there's product, there's metrics, and then I call the last one valuation, or the terms of the deal. Well, what's the opportunity? And for us at Foundation, for me personally, we're really focused on the first and the second, the team and the market. And mostly the reason for that is we come in very, very early. And usually there's very little metrics. 95% of the time we're investing before there's any revenue. There's usually no product. 70-75% of the time we're investing before there's any product. So for us, it's really about what makes this team special and what makes this sub-market within cyber in this case special, and can this team play in the sub-market in a unique way? And then I think the second part is that the biggest question when subsectors have these amazing outcomes like Wiz, and Wiz isn't the only amazing outcome that we've been fortunate to have, but when something like this happens, is it attracts people who are tourists. And they're tourist investors, and then they're tourist founders. And for us, the biggest role as a investor is to try to figure out who are the tourist founders. Because the worst situation you can be in is, invest in tourist founders.
Yeah, it just made me think of, Ross, you also touched upon yes, there is noise, and then you have to look at who are the founders and how's the market. But what do you think right now the biggest problems out there when it comes to, okay, are we really addressing some of the biggest attack surfaces? And do you think there is enough product market fit at this time? Because I spoke to someone right before RSA, and they were mentioning there are actually fewer people going there just because the external environment isn't the best and things like that. What do you guys think about this?
I don't know. You see, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer from the customer standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think this is ultimately a CISO, a security leader question. Like, are you, for the problems you're tackling, are you seeing enough options for you to be able to find something that's most suitable? I do believe that the state of the industry is such that I think there is a good number of companies that are tackling most of the business problems that CISOs are dealing with. But I do also think that some of the problems are not the business problems. And the industry as a whole is experiencing some problems that cannot be effectively solved through funding startups or through building startups. Like, there are some more systemic problems, some ecosystem problems. For example, like just several days ago, we have seen this story about CVE and exactly and the potential for the CVE program to not receive funding that it needed to continue. And when you look at things like this happen, this is just an example. There is more of those. You realize that cybersecurity as an industry relies on different projects and initiatives and contributions that constitute the critical infrastructure for the security space, right? There are some not-for-profit organizations. There are some open source projects that make great contributions, but there is not enough funding to support those because the business model isn't there, right? It's all not-for-profit projects, like not made to generate returns, so they cannot attract VC funding. They often cannot attract funding from other places. And so those are probably the more glaring underfunded areas. But as far as security problems are concerned, I think because there is enough venture capital in this space and there's enough great founders and there's enough good VCs, I think we are good there.
I think since we are speaking about investments in the space, it would be interesting to hear one of your stories about certain investment that you initially thought is counterintuitive, but then proved successful,
Yeah, it's funny. You never go into an investment thinking like, this is going to be a difficult company. So typically the time when you're most excited ends up being when you make the investment and when there's a positive exit. And sometimes there's no positive exit. So if you looked at your, generally the arc of your excitement for a company, the highest excitement is usually when you make the investment. So you don't go into a company, investing into a company being like, I don't know if this idea is going to work, but let me just write this investment and we'll find out. At least in our case, we don't do that because we are very high conviction investors. We do a few investments every year. We don't do 50 investments a year. I think if you're doing 50, maybe there's probably 20, 30% of those investments that you make where you're like, I don't know, maybe it'll end up okay, but we'll find out. So I'll reframe that question and still answer it, but with that point in mind.
He'll answer his own question.
Basically create your own question and answer it. Yes.
I'll try to answer it. I remember I invested in a company called Ativo Networks, and we made that investment just about 10 years ago now. And at the time that we made it, Ativo was focused on a category called deception security at that time. It was very, very hot. Like if you had gone to the RSA floor, I mean, the biggest companies the new startups were all talking about deception. There were a few companies. There's a company called TrapX, Israeli company. There's a company called Elusive Networks. There's a company called Symmetria, which was started actually by two very famous founders, Gadi, who just started a new company that's in Sandbox, and then Dean Siesman, who's the founder of Axonius. So there are a few of those, and then there were like a couple of other companies that have since pivoted, like Guardicore, that was in this market as well. It was certainly a category that was getting a lot of excitement, but customer traction across all those companies was early. It was just relatively early. And in Attivo's case, what was happening was we had a number of very, very high quality blue chip customers who were customers, but they weren't paying us a lot. And so the big bet that you had to make was that those opportunities could become a lot bigger. That longer term, they could be a lot bigger. And that's why I spent a lot of time trying to understand what is the customer mindset? How do they think about deception? How do they think about Attivo versus some of the other products that are in the landscape? And I think the amazing thing there was that if you dug in, really understood that opportunity could be 5, 10x the revenue, the initial revenue that you got from that specific customer, then you could really see a market. And that was certainly, once you did the diligence, it became almost abundantly clear that was going to be the opportunity, even though the data didn't indicate it. The historical data when you looked at for Attivo wasn't that obvious. And so we made the investment, and the company was really off to the races. First year, second year, fantastic since our investment, and then third year there was some complexity. And to the team's credit, what the team was very good at doing at Attivo was really figuring out where's the puck going. So if the puck was moving away from deception security, how do we think about adapting our product to move with the customer? And so we moved kind of from deception security into detection response, leveraging deception, honeypots. And then the third area that we ended up focusing on is now called identity threat detection response, ITDR. But it was really that ability to switch from one to the other as the market switched, and still leverage the technology, the foundational technology that you had built, but leverage it in unique ways.
It made me think of the phrase, what's the phrase? You're not in the market that you think you are, you're in the market that's your customers think
Exactly.
you are.
I think you have to listen to the customer, and you have to realize that maybe you built something and maybe it is valuable, but maybe it isn't valuable anymore. And you have to, be humble enough to adjust.
Yeah, and it almost feels sometimes like security is a form of fashion, right? Like there is a new wave, and this new wave brings a number of companies that start tackling the problem from the similar angle, and then things change and buyers evolve their thinking. They still see this foundational technology as useful, but they now want more, and you have to evolve with their needs.
I think that's true just generally in technology. Sure. I think it's not even cyber related. That's just tech is... it has to change to the moods of customers.
So it would be interesting to know what kind of fashion we are in right now. Ross, question to you.
The influencer, tell us the fashion trend today.
No, so you've written extensively about product market fit in cybersecurity. Do you have an example of company that pivoted effectively to find the right market?
Yeah, I don't. I feel like this is more of a Sid's question, because you
can change the question.
Yeah, let's change the question. Or you know what I'm going to come up with a new question and then answer.
Yes.
Sid, have you seen a company that has successfully done like a major pivot? I feel like at the end,
I think, not major pivot is very hard to do. Like major pivot would be, there are lots of examples of it. They're not investments that I've done, but Slack is a great example of, major pivot that happened.
But in security specifically.
In security.
I think in security, the dilemma is that when you're starting in a specific area, let's just say if you're starting within the network, then you're going to be talking to people doing network security. If you're starting in application security, if you're building something for AppSec, you're going to be talking to people doing AppSec. So you are likely to evolve, but it will be the evolution within the boundaries of the sub-market that you've chosen, right? I feel like in security, unless you go to YC, in which case you see companies pivot from, consumer like a marketplace into building agents to automate supply chain. Like you see some absolutely unique and big pivots. In security, it's more of an evolving the product with the customer, like as you understand the customer needs within the subcategory that you've already picked. That's how I see it.
I think part of that is because domain expertise ends up being so important in cyber. You really do need to understand A, the cyber market, but B, also that specific sub-market. You know, the quality of talent and the type of talent you need in network security is very different to endpoint security. And so if you want to switch from one to the other, it's harder to do it halfway through building a company.
Basically, if you're starting with a browser extension, for example, you're not going to end up building a SIM company.
Never know, but yes, you will. Hopefully you are.
Sure. It's highly unlikely.
That's true.
Yeah. No, it's we started a conversation from when you were saying security companies evolve how the attackers evolve, right? So whatever attackers are doing, and I feel like this industry is growing so much because we have attackers. If we didn't have them, there wouldn't be as much growth probably. So in our research, we found browser threats becoming more and more apparent and more evident. And, so many SaaS platforms, they're all moving to cloud and everything. So everything is happening there. So then the question is, does it change where the venture dollars are going?
I think as attackers find new ways to go after a market, it certainly has an impact. And that impact is, there are repercussions that happen. So one impact is when an attacker changes their strategy, that impacts the customers. And typically the customers, they learn about these new strategies through threat intel reports, as well as through teams like Mandiant. And then, they start looking for new technologies to go after reducing that risk. And so, that forces vendors to think about, well, how do we, meet this specific risk? And some of those vendors, their potential founders who are employees who, are trying to meet a specific risk, and they realize, I can't do this as easily at this company. Let me go and start my own company to go after this. And then ultimately those folks end up at an office, and that office is hopefully it's Foundation Capital's office, and they, give the pitch to me, and that forces me to think about, hold on, how are we, what's happened that's changed? And so each of us is kind of interconnected, and certainly I think what's happened, going back to your first question, which is what has happened in cyber today versus 5 or certainly 10 years ago, is that cycle is a lot clearer now. Now all of us are reading the same threat intel reports. So part of that is that the vendors adjust before the customers can even think about the problem and how that problem may impact them specifically in their environment.
And I guess to your question too, in many industries, it's the customer behavior and the opportunities created by technological advancements that create new ideas and really create an opportunity for some new angles and new types of startups. In security, those two are still true. And to your point, right, there are some secular trends that are true and that are only going to be more true. Yes, the browser has become like an operating system in the enterprise. That's where the majority of the users spend their time. But that alone doesn't necessarily create a security market. Like it does create a security market more from the observability standpoint and understanding what are employees doing in the browser. But it's only once the attackers also realize that, hey, this is a new place that we can go and target. And that's where it starts to create more security-focused companies around detection and response, around prevention, and so on and so forth. I do find it interesting because I think as we get better at securing one layer, it makes it hard for attackers to go and tackle that layer because there's too many controls in place. So they start to shift their attention into another area that is less protected. And then once that other area also gets enough vendors, enough customers that address the problem, then they will shift their attention again and again.
Yeah, basically they move. I think there is also movement towards where you actually spend your time. Whether I think back in the past where, for example, browsers were practically just rendering engines, you just could secure it with simpler ways. But right now, whether it's browser or any other tool, they're just becoming more and more complex. That's why you just have to sort of stay on the top of what attackers are doing and what are the ways. And I think since we touched upon, this is a question to you, Ross. I remember actually in one of your older articles, I
hope I remember it too.
You don't have to remember.
ChatGPT remembers it though.
No ChatGPT.
But you were talking about time to trust.
Yes.
And, you know, in the browser security field, is shortening time to trust as important, or should founders focus more on product and innovation?
I don't know. I feel like regardless which area of security we look at, it's like security buyers need to understand the technology. They need to understand the value it brings, and they need to be able to get to that value quickly. So the quicker they can get to value, the quicker they can understand what the product offers, and the quicker they can do the POC, the quicker they can buy, the more successful the company is likely to be. I don't think that changes when you go from one area to another. Now, I do think that in some areas it's harder to get to value simply because you are asking people to change their behaviors, right? Like if you're asking people to implement a new browser, for example, then you are essentially asking them to change behavior. If you're asking people to, I don't know, like maybe implement like a different developer environment, then you're asking people to change behavior, and behavioral change is hard. If you are implementing something that's invisible or something that doesn't get into the way how people are used to doing their work, it generally is much easier. I think in many organizations, security doesn't actually have as much power as security leaders would like to get. Or sadly, that is just the reality of life. And so anything that creates an obstacle for the end user, like anything that makes it hard for a person in finance to do their job is going to be harder to implement. That's something that doesn't get into their way. Anything that makes it hard for developer to ship code quickly and move the business forward is going to be much harder to implement than something that doesn't.
Yeah, I agree. Do you agree as well, Sid?
I agree with most of that, what Ross said, except for his last point that that security leaders don't have as much power as they would like. I think yes, they don't have as much as they want, but they have quite a lot of power.
Yeah, but that's precisely what I'm saying. But they don't have as much as they would like.
No, but every time I hear security leaders talk about that, like, oh, it's so hard being a CISO, I'm always like, oh.
No, but there is a difference between saying that, like, oh, it's hard to be a CISO versus like, hey, it would legitimately lead to a better security if we could, for example, do this form of prevention. But it's really hard to implement this form of prevention.
So I think the difference is that in most organizations, security teams actually have a lot of power on how to, what they can force employees to do. A lot more than they did 10 years ago, and a lot more than most other senior leaders do have, right? Like if you're a security leader and you say, hey, I want to implement SSO and MFA for everybody, and if we don't implement it, then our risk of breach goes up by 35%, and you say that to your public company board of directors, as soon as they hear your risk of breach goes up, they'll just say yes, absolutely, whatever you want.
You've picked a very convenient example, but yes, sure.
I think surprisingly, there's a lot of things that security teams can do that otherwise would be, in most other subsegments, it would be very hard to implement, new technology or new strategy or new approaches. Mostly because there's always this fear of what happens if a threat actor goes after that specific vulnerability.
Yeah, no, it does make sense.
I'm glad you found the consensus somewhere in the middle. And but do you think we spoke to CISOs, right? How much power they have, and it's very interesting to see. I spoke to CISOs. I think what a lot of them bring up is this constant battle with the board about, hey, how much is it a priority? Do you see this still being the case today, with all the breaches going on?
I think CISOs like to believe that it's very tough for them, and it's very, very difficult to convince their board. And for the most part, if you're at a public company, you actually have quite a lot of latitude. And you have quite a lot of latitude because of the complexities of reporting for a public company and the risk, the specific fiduciary duties that board of directors have at a public company. And so the likelihood that those board of directors are going to push back on a CISO, particularly a CISO who's asking for additional money to go and, reduce risk, is very low today. And there's enough kind of examples of mistakes made in the past by boards of directors or by executive teams or by CEOs to kind of cut back cyber spending and how that really hurt them. In private companies, particularly private companies that are owned by an individual, I think the risk is a lot higher. And the reason the risk is a lot higher is because that individual doesn't fully understand that cyber is, as big of a problem. And so what we see is actually there's a lot of risk among small and medium businesses, which are typically owned by individuals or families who just don't think that they will be attacked. And we don't hear about these as much because they don't end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. It's just not exciting to say that, some, auto body part company in San Francisco had a ransomware attack happen. It's just not interesting for the general public in the US or globally. But there are a lot of cases of that happening. I mean, SMB risk has only increased in the past few years. And it's increased because, and Ross alluded to this point early on, but amongst enterprises, it's very, very clear that cyber, is a potential threat. I think amongst consumers, average people, it's clear that it's a threat, but there's a view that the threat isn't to them. There's a view
because nobody is targeting them.
Exactly. There's this view that no, the threat is that the bank might be breached and I might lose my money. They're not thinking about, my email might be breached and then somebody could go and access my bank account, which is not JP Morgan being breached. It's just my email being breached and my account being breached.
Yeah, the biggest misconception that I see is that people assume, and people and small businesses, as Sid says, they assume that we are too small to be targeted. And that's just not how attackers work.
Yeah.
Right. They spray and pray. They cast a very wide net, and sometimes it's a large enterprise that gets in there. But in most cases, it's smaller organizations that don't have any foundational controls that end up getting breached.
I saw this recent report as we are talking about small, medium-sized, large enterprises, where they said that the more people involved in security buying, the faster the adoption is. And I wonder, if this is something that also helps them to stay on top of things, right? Is it always tied up to budget, or is it some cultural change that
I think it's
happening?
both. I think it's both. I think it's both budget, and you have to, culturally change the organization to focus on this. I mean, password managers is probably the best example of that. One part is, do you want to pay the $25 a month or whatever 1Password's current rate is to purchase the solution per person? The second piece is, how do you convince that person to move all their accounts to 1Password?
Yeah.
You can spend the money, but if they don't use it, it's just very, very hard to.
Yeah, I don't know if I fully agree that the more people there are involved in the buying process, the easier it is to adopt the tool. I would say that the more, I would probably view it as the opposite. The more people are involved in the buying process, that generally means that the organization is much bigger and much more complex. And if an organization is much bigger and much more complex, it will take longer to get something rolled out. They can be on top of security, just change management takes longer. When you've got, it's much easier to turn a speedboat than it is a very big, very big ship.
It was mostly from the perspective of when it comes to small enterprises and they have, let's say, one security head and that's it, right? And that security head goes on vacation and then security buying stops. So I think it was mostly from that.
Yeah, the CEO is involved, and hopefully he or she understands what the technology does, and hopefully they get a better understanding, and as a result, they're more likely to adopt. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think it's like in smaller companies where there is only one person at best dedicated to security, then obviously the adoption is going to be slow. And then at very large companies, when there is like 40 people involved in the buying process, that's also going to be slow. But it's like
somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
Yeah, I wonder whether being in security yourself, how did it change your habits? Like your personal habits, we spoke about enterprise, we can speak about consumer.
All of Ross's passwords are still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And star,
No.
I guess, because you have to put star in there.
No, I will admit it has changed my mindset quite a bit. I mean, like, look, I think before getting into the security space, I had the very same idea that like, oh, who's going to target me? Like at best, as long as I don't click on like clearly, just damn phishing emails, like I will be good. But then the reality is that life is a bit more complex. I was using a password manager before, but I wasn't using it for all the accounts. Like I sort of mentally would prioritize and say, you know what, this is not important. Now I don't see it that way anymore. But I do. It does, like it changes your habits big time, and that is because when you work in the security space, you are a part of this echo chamber where every single day you go on social media, like you open the news and you see, the social media algorithm pushing you the news of like, oh, there was a new breach around this. There was, this type of, vulnerability was exposed and something happens over here. When you are an average person whose personal algorithm is tuned to show, I don't know, cats and flowers, you don't really see just how bad our digital infrastructure actually is. Like you're not exposed to it. And that is, to me, one of the biggest problems. It's so fascinating that if you look at the statistics, over the past 20 years, the crime rate in the country, like in the United States, has gone down dramatically. Like, yes, there are obviously places where, the decrease wasn't that substantial because of all the challenges with homelessness and so on and so forth. But on average, the decrease has been dramatic. Now, if you at the same time, during the same time frame, the number of cybersecurity incidents has skyrocketed. But when you turn on the news, which of those two are you hearing about? Which of those two do you see? There's always reporting about crime. There is barely any reporting about cybersecurity incidents unless it's something just absolutely outrageous where it impacts like millions and millions of people. And then you wonder, why is that? And obviously, I'm not going into any kind of conspiracies, but it's more that general consumers don't understand security. They don't get scared. They don't have an emotional response to it. And for that reason, the news media don't have the reasons to show it. Yeah. But it's the lack of that education that impacts personal habits. And if you're not exposed to it, as I wasn't when I was working in other areas, you don't necessarily know what's actually happening around you. And mind you, I worked in financial technology space, so I knew I understood the risk. I didn't fully understand the consumer side of it, and most people don't.
Yeah, I love how you compare it, cyber risk and physical security. Having lived in Singapore, we practically don't have any physical risk, right? And then there are so many phishing calls, phishing emails. You just can't think like how many. And then the front page news is just like a man walking outside naked. And it's so crazy to think that this is the focus of the whole country versus the cyber risk, because it's probably not as visible. Yeah.
It's not as visible, and people don't want to feel unprotected. Because in reality, in any country, it doesn't matter where you go, if you're talking about just like regular crime, you know that yes, bad things are happening, but there is police and they will take care of it.
Yeah.
And generally that's the understanding that people have. But if you look at cybercrime, there is no cyber police. And if there is, it's probably not going to come and take care of your bank account. Like if something bad happens to you, this is your problem. And people don't want to think about it. It's too depressing.
What about you, Sid?
I think, I think what's happened really, and it is changing. I think I've been fortunate to kind of cover this market for the last 12 years. Like I think 12 years ago, no one really cared about cyber, and no one would ever ask me any questions.
When did you start using a password manager? That's the question.
No. The question is like the broader physical versus digital. But I think like 12 years ago, there wasn't really much interest amongst the population. I mean, today, the one big difference, yes, not every news report or article is about cybersecurity, but there are actually quite a few. And it's also being covered in the media in other ways, right? When you watch a TV show, there's a cyber attack that happens. I remember when I first saw something like that happen, I remember I was watching The Morning Show, which is like this Apple TV show about like primetime TV. And I think it was the second season where they had a cyber attack. And I watched it with my wife, and I was like, wow, like finally, like, this is like a TV show that's not for software oriented people. It's like completely the opposite of anything to do with cyber attacks. And now they're talking about a cyber attack. And, there are lots of things that they made mistakes on in terms of how to deal with the cyber attack. But the entire show was about, there's this event that happened, and whatever, there are 10 episodes on the topic.
I think what is truly sad, to your point, is that not only we are starting to hear about incidents in the news, but I bet each of us knows somebody that has been impacted by some form of cybercrime in some way. Like either, people got scammed on a dating app, or like somebody's crypto wallet got hacked, or, somebody got phished, or even as simple as, credit card fraud. Like most of us have been impacted by it in some form ourselves. Like I personally had like at least once or twice, I think, credit card fraud. But most people haven't felt the pain of it, because what happens if you see fraudulent charges on your credit card? You call your bank, and your bank is going to mark it as fraud and send you the new card, cancel your existing card, and reimburse all of those charges. But and for that reason, people don't feel it. But once there is a ransomware in a hospital, and you're reading on the news that, people had to be transported to another hospital. Once you see that an airport got shut down and all planes were grounded because of some technical issue, and you don't know what the technical issue is. Once you start getting exposed to that, and then you hear that, your former classmate just got scammed, and when it starts to sort of surround your life, that's when you start to realize that, hey, this is real.
Yeah, I think like the number of folks who have now, over the last few years, particularly last 3 to 5 years, who've reached out to me, just generally people I've known about cyber related stuff has gone up dramatically. I mean, no one really cared about what I invested in or what that meant. But now, a great example of this was, I remember the day after the CrowdStrike Falcon incident, a very close college friend of mine who's a doctor in Texas at an emergency hospital. He texted me. He's like, "Hey, our systems are down because of this CrowdStrike thing. Have you heard of it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've heard of the CrowdStrike thing. Believe me." And I remember saying like, "Yeah, I'll send it to some CrowdStrike folks. They definitely will be aware." But I think the average person is a lot more informed of cybersecurity and of potential threats. Now, I think they haven't yet gone to the point where they will take action, which is partly why most of the innovation we have seen in cyber today has been around enterprise risk, not around consumer risks. Like we don't see that many consumer apps that are focused on cybersecurity.
I have a different perspective. I think if we as an industry are going to be expecting that consumers are going to take care of their security, we have failed. We have all failed. Because for an average consumer, like an average grandma watching a TV, should not have to think about cyber safety. They should have the most basic level of awareness, which I think we are slowly getting to. But security has to be made invisible, and it has to be baked into our day-to-day infrastructure. Payment systems have to work in such a way that it should be hard for a scammer to just get access to your email and suddenly like all the money just left your bank account. It should be hard, like MFA should get enforced. And it's not on the consumer to click enable. It's on the tech company to say MFA is mandatory and here is the only way. Here, you cannot use SMS. Like, yes, it does increase some barrier, but that's how we as an industry actually make a dent in security, not by building an app and hoping that people are going to buy an app. That's my perspective.
It looks like right now it's really becoming this gray area, consumer versus enterprise. If we think even about the whole working population, right? You're both a consumer and you're also working in a company, right? And whenever we talk about the outages at the airports, hospitals, usually is this, you just need to have this little loophole to get into a system. And that can be via dating app. You never know what's the first entry point. So it's all about, I think right now, is this mixture of personal life and work life. That's what leads into system. I don't know if you have different opinion.
No, I think that's true.
I don't. I absolutely don't. The only opinion I would have is that, and like what you said is correct. And my hope would be that we can build that. First of all, we can build systems that are secure by default. But secondly, that companies like and employers can have enough resources and can get to the level of maturity where they can implement the right controls so that if somebody's personal dating app gets compromised, that doesn't impact the enterprise. Because I wouldn't hope that an average individual is going to be able to take care of their security and themselves.
Yeah, just to make the whole experience more seamless. And okay, one of the last questions is, where do you see some of the overlooked opportunities in cybersecurity market? We spoke about how to make this whole experience seamless, but what do you think is missing or people didn't look into too much?
Sid, tell us.
I think it's hard. I think right now what I'm very focused on is how do we leverage agentic infrastructure to go after very specific pieces of both the cyber and the IT workflow. And we've seen some of that innovation. Most of it today has been around kind of the SOC and the SOC workflow and how do we automate a portion of what tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 analysts do. And candidly, we've been trying to do that even pre-LLMs, but that's an ongoing battle. Post that, I think we've seen a decent amount of new innovation around security engineering workflows. So product security and SecEng teams, what are the different things they do and how do we try to automate some portion of that work, particularly around management of tickets as they're interacting with developers. Yeah. But I think there are opportunities broadly in cloud security and how you manage cloud security and leverage agentic platforms for that. There's opportunities in network. And broadly network infra as well as network security. There's opportunities in email, and how do you deal with that? There's opportunities in threat intel. There's opportunities in red teaming. I mean, it's really it's really about like, hey, how do we take some of this new kind of underlying base technology, which is these large language models have been created, and you can leverage these LLMs, particularly the ones the models that have reasoning. And use AI agents to go and make some portion of the decisions. So I think there's a big, kind of new set of companies that will be formed. But I think we're at the early innings of that happening. I think like outside of just like if we remove the stuff going on in the LLM world, I look at kind of the sectors where we saw lots and lots of innovation 10, 15 years ago in security, and we haven't seen as much today. So network, I think we've seen limited innovation in the last 10 to 15 years. I think we will see a lot more innovation. I think endpoint is getting close to that, right? The last time we saw a massive rebirth of the endpoint market now has been, 10, 12 years. So we are, towards the tail end of that. And when that happens, it creates, this big opportunity. I think, kind of the broader application security testing tools, we're, at the tail end of that. And I think that we will see new generation of companies there.
Yeah, We'll make sure to meet in 5 years and discuss whether your prediction was true.
For sure.
No, VCs never do retrospectives. Everything is always forward
Looking into future.
We try to. I think founders actually do very little retrospectives because you can't be, right? If you go and sit there and you're like, I made this mistake, and you'll never be able to go and invent the future if you're thinking backwards. VCs spend a lot of time retrospecting. They just do it privately. It's very hard to go out there and say, hey, like we failed here and we failed here and we failed here. No founder would want to talk to you if you just talked about your failures.
Yeah. So we have this little tradition on our podcast where usually our previous guest asks questions for our next guest. So our previous guest asked, what are tactical ways to embed security guidelines and guardrails into culture of a company? And how do you culturally do it and not from a tooling perspective?
I think the number one way to do it is to get the founders and the executive leadership on board and to have them talk about it. Meaning, if you have a CEO talking about security incidents and why it's important to be vigilant, why it's important to follow the best practices on the company all hands, and if it happens on, let's just say, monthly basis, if there is some kind of time allocated to it, like you will see shift. You will also see shift when you see that the executive leadership is not trying to work around the very same controls that are being imposed on other people. Basically, if the CEO is asking the security team to turn off MFA because it's too hard for them to log in, trust me, it will propagate. Like it will propagate and it will spread. So, but aside from it, it's starting at the top. So having the executive leadership dedicate some time and giving space to security leaders to do the same. Like from the security leader standpoint, there's always an opportunity to do some kind of a newsletter talking about the new attacks, but making it approachable. And I've personally met a number of people that have done a fantastic job at that, because at the end of the day, people don't actually care about 0 days. People don't know what 0 days are. People don't care about vulnerabilities. But if you can master the art of storytelling, and if you can explain to people in a very simple to understand, story-shaped way that, hey, something is a problem and here is why you should care about, and here is an incident that happened at this other company because they didn't do XYZ, and like let's try to do better. Like people, it will resonate with people. People are not dumb. People are not trying to ignore security. They just don't understand it. And they don't like obstacles. So if the security team can implement the controls in such a way that is non-invasive and that's seamless and evangelize about security, I think that's all really you need for you to build the right culture.
And read Ross's blog.
That too. That's it. And listen to Inside the Network podcast.
That's a great way to do it.
That is.
What do you think, Sid?
I think the only thing I'd add to what Ross already mentioned is that the more individuals, whether they're employees or consumers, learn about what's happening in the threat landscape, the better it is. Because if you're talking about a breach that happened at your company and how you're reacting to that, it's already too late. At that point, everyone's aware. When you get breached, then suddenly every employee is very aware of why security matters. It's harder to do that before you have that happen. And the better way to do it is to go and highlight like, hey, this happened at this company, which is in our sector or, similar size, or a company that you have heard of. Target had a major breach happen in 2013. And it's a company that most of us have, in some shape or form gone to a Target store and bought something. So I think just it's all about making things relatable to Ross's point. And I think it's the most important part.
But to me, I would still argue that the most important part is making security invisible. Because I don't remember, somebody said it once, if it was all about awareness, then nobody would be smoking. And I think that's key. You can do all kind of awareness all you want, but at the end of the day, you just have to build systems and processes that make it hard for people to fall into the trap.
I agree. I think it's just hard to make security completely invisible today. I don't think we have. I think in the future, maybe there will be, if you can imagine agents working so seamlessly, that they would be able to determine when Ross was going to make a mistake and say, hold on, you're about to, kind of like the Minority Report, kind of situation where they can determine that Ross is about to do something that's going to hurt the company and stop him. And it would be great.
Maybe, but it's also about, making the browser secure so that people don't actually have to worry about how they use the browser, so that the browser notifies them. Making their email secure so that people don't have to think, oh, should I click or should I not? Like, we should be able to filter out a lot of those messages. It's making it easy for people to take the right path.
Yeah, the right answer is just to make it easy for everyone.
For sure.
So what question would you like to ask to our next guest? You don't know who it is, by the way. It can be anyone.
Sid, your turn. You're creative.
Where's ChatGPT when you need it? No, I'm joking. I think the question I'd have, and this is going to be a founder, or you're not even going to tell us like roughly?
Probably head of security.
Head of security. Excellent. Okay, that's more helpful. What's an example of an area that you don't think AI agents can actually help to, help automate that process? Like, what are the examples? Because, you asked me this question about how, all the ways that agentic infrastructure can help across security. But I think there are lots of different situations where it's not that helpful. I think leaders in cyber, particularly from the customer side, should talk a little bit about kind of, what are those examples so that hopefully we don't have founders building companies in those areas.
I think that's a great question. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming to our Be Fearless podcast. It's been a lot of fun. I make sure to take all the fun cuts into it. And yeah, it's been fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. Like it has been a pleasure, and it's great to have host of one podcast join the other podcast.
It is fun. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.